world where spam emails flood our inboxes and unwanted messages inundate our digital lives, it might sound counterintuitive to consider spam as a privilege. However, as my guest today, Smita Ram says, receiving spam is an indicator that you have something rather than nothing. Smita Ram is the CEO of Rangde, a peer-to-peer lending platform that brings colour into the lives of small businesses, farmers and artisans in rural India. These businesses have very little by way of digital or credit footprints, so they don't get spammed for loans and credit. It's other people who need access to funding the most. Smita shares how she and her husband Ram spent some years in the United Kingdom, during which they contrasted life in a British village with life in an Indian village. This spurred them on to do something that would change the lives of people in rural India. They returned to India with a plan to establish Rangde. Smita shares how Rangde not only contributes to individual success, but also fosters a ripple effect of positive change across entire communities. Over the years, Rangde has helped 100,000 entrepreneurs and families, breaking the cycle of poverty and creating avenues for sustainable development. Okay, well, Smita, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters today. You run an organization called Rangde. Could you tell us a little bit about that organization, what it does, please?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Sanjay, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Rangde is essentially a peer-to-peer lending platform with a very strong focus on serving underserved populations in rural India with access to affordable credit. And the term Rangde itself is very significant. It actually stands for adding color at one level. And it also has a very patriotic appeal to it. It's really about helping India become a developed nation. So that's really where the genesis of the name Rangde is.
And is getting finance for people in rural areas, I'm assuming that's quite a difficult thing for them to do without the sort of support that you're able to offer.
Absolutely. About more than 65% of people we fund on the platform are people with absolutely no credit scores. And in a country like India, that actually is a big reason why people are denied credit from formal financial institutions, because lack of data for underwriting really, because there's no financial footprint for them, which makes it very hard for formal financial institutions that are structured in a very specific way to lend to them. And because of this, they end up borrowing from informal sources, or they have very limited choice to make a good decision about what kind of loan products actually work for them. So in this scenario, Rangde operates with a focus on ensuring both affordability and accessibility of credit for rural entrepreneurs, farmers, and artisans.
Right. Okay. And so how did you get started in this, Smita?
That's quite some time back, actually, exactly 2 years ago now. Um, yeah, absolutely. So 26th January, we celebrated Rangde's 16th birthday. The story also goes back to, when we were living in the United Kingdom. And this was in 2004. And both Ram and me, Ram is my partner, also my co-founder. We both started Rangde. We used to live in UK, and it was for the first time we were actually living in a developed country, and we couldn't help but compare the quality of life in India to the quality of life that we had in Oxford. And we just kept thinking, how many years would it take for India to get to this stage, right? Everybody calls India a developing country. So how long would it take for us to go from the developing state to the developed country? And then we couldn't help but wonder, what can we do about it, right? So we can complain, we can say, oh, this can be better, can we do this better? But then the best way of, doing something about it is to actually do something about it, right? So can we, as citizens of the country, actually do something to solve this problem? So that is where the restlessness actually began, that, are we doing enough to, change India's destiny? And, in whatever small way can we actually create an impact? So that's where it all started. And we actively started to, plan our move back to India. And we set a goal for ourselves that we'll be there for about 2 years, save enough to actually make that move back to India. We didn't actually move back in 2 years. So 2 years is when we started planning it. Eventually moved back to 4 years when we had all the building blocks for Rangde that had been late. So we were clear that, okay, this is where we want to, make a difference, get started and see where we go. So that's how it all began.
All right. Okay. So you went back to India with a specific goal, which was to establish Rangde and do that. And as you say, you move from helping you move from a developing to a developed status, which I suppose I was just thinking, with the current growth of GDP in India and its acceleration, I suppose, at what point do you say it's a developed nation when it's overtaking what were previously the developed nations in that context? So, how do you measure that, I suppose?
For me, I think it's very simple. I think, a lot is actually hidden behind numbers, right? On one hand, we talk about GDP growth, which looks really good. But I think what really needs to happen in India is equal opportunities, right? The growth is still not equitable. And unless that happens, we can't really call India a developed country. And if you look at it, very simple, a village in India and a village in United Kingdom. Can we compare, the levels and the standard of living in these two countries? The day these are equal, right? That is when I feel that India will be a developed country. And I feel that we are still far away from there, right? Be it about the quality of employment, the quality of work that we do in the country. All of this, it's not that of a developed country yet. We still have a while to go.
Right. Yeah, understood. That makes complete sense. So when you first kind of landed back in India, and what was your first loan? Who was it to, and how much was it for?
Okay, that's just very interesting and brings back a lot of memories. So our first loan was to a borrower in a state called Maharashtra in Western India, and this was in a very poor slum in a place called Nagpur. And this was a lady who used to run a cycle repair shop, so she used to have a tiny workshop where, she and her son would repair bicycles. And she actually started a new business with our loan. She wanted to also start renting out bicycles to people because there was a lot of demand for it. And there was nobody who was renting out bicycles for hire. And her name was Kusum, and she actually started this new business activity with our loan.
Okay, so a whole new line to her business. And how long does she have to pay that loan back, and where is her business now after that initial help from yourselves?
We haven't, this was way back 16 years ago, so we haven't been in touch with Kusum of late, but for the initial couple of years after she had been given a loan, we actually saw her business expand. So one of her sons was also helping her, so he kind of became like her business partner in some sense after they, developed the business a little more. So that was that initial growth capital for them to start this was very important. Otherwise, Kusum would, have ended up either borrowing from a money lender or, pledging her jewels to actually get a loan, which is something that, she was able to avoid because of this. And her loan was about 40,000 rupees, Indian rupees, and from 3 different individuals. So that's the best part about what we do. On one hand, we ensure people like Kusum get access to affordable loans. On the other hand, people like you and me can actually become micro investors in, businesses like that of Kusum, which kind of brings the two sides of India together. On one hand, the developing, but on one hand, there's also the India that is booming, right? So we're trying to bring both of them together through the platform.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So all your funding is provided by people who are investing through you in these businesses. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And so if someone wanted to get involved in terms of the lending, what process would they have to follow? How could they actually get involved in Rangde and become an investor in these micro businesses?
Oh, it's very simple. I'd like to believe it's pretty straightforward. People can the platform and with very basic details like their mobile number and an email ID, create an account on the platform with some very basic documentation. We're also a regulated platform. It's a platform regulated by the Reserve Bank of India, the Central Bank of India. So there's some basic documentation that we expect every social investor. The lenders on the platform are called social investors. So for them to actually sign up is pretty seamless with that documentation. And then after that, they can choose either a fund that they want to invest in. For example, we have something called a Groundbreakers Fund. So any investment in this fund actually goes to power rural women entrepreneurs. So similarly, they can also choose an individual and invest in their business. So both the options are available to people. So everything is self-service. So people can just go onto the platform, choose individuals or funds they want to invest in. And once they've invested, they can actually stay, connected with the progress that this individual is making. So they get to see updates on what's been happening, the repayments that are coming back, and, the progress that are happening in these micro ventures on the ground.
You touched on money lenders earlier. Did you, when you started this and started engaging with micro businesses, did you get pushback from money lenders? Did you get any sort of, I don't know, threats or anything of that nature from people whose business you were potentially going to disrupt with your models?
I wish we had, but we haven't.
Oh, that's good.
I wish we had is I believe that would be a time when, we have actually made a dent, right?
Right.
And we have actually, at that point is when we have begun these micro movements of change, and there's enough uptake for runway loans that, people don't need to go to money lenders anymore. But, the population and the need in India is so much that one runway, at least in our current scale, is not able to address the problem in its entirety. But we do have a lot of great word of mouth now in the community. We have actually now, seen and heard anecdotal evidence where, when we are in forums with other lenders, other lending institutions come and tell us, oh, you are the guys behind runway. Those farmers in Assam now said that they only want runway loans and they don't want to take loans from us. Oh, you are the guys behind it. So that's the kind of word of mouth we are actually seeing in the community. So hopefully, sometime soon that's going to happen, when we scale and make runway big enough, that should happen, because that's the ultimate dream, right? We don't want any of our community members to be, borrowing from loan sharks, because that's never going to help them get out of poverty.
So if I'm a Kusum looking to build my business or do something further, how do I even know that you exist, and how would I get in touch with yourselves to say, I need some help, or I could do with some financial inputs?
At this point, because, everything on Runway is online and, is powered by the technology platform, Kusum cannot reach out to us directly. So what we have done on the ground is created a network of partner organizations. And what do I mean by them? So in India, there are many organizations that are working at the community level, enabling livelihoods, incubating enterprise development at the grassroots, working with farmers, providing them with agronomy services. So there are a lot of organizations that have enough social capital on the ground. They've actually been working there for a few decades now. What Runway does is builds on top of what is already there, right? So we partner with them. With these organizations, we ensure that credit is enabled to the last mile, because it's impossible for Runway to be present in all of these geographies. But at the same time, how do we leverage this social capital that has already been built by these organizations on the ground? So we partner with them. They identify individuals who need access to credit, and this is actually updated onto our platform, which then undergoes a credit decisioning underwriting process on the platform. And then, a blurb about this individual is actually published on the platform. But what happens behind the scenes is like a loan application with all the information required for the underwriting to happen. So across India, we have built a very strong network of organizations. And this also ensures that money is just not being used for any other purpose. There's a very clear and a well-defined plan for utilization of the money that is being given to them. And then the payback also happens because it's going for a very productive activity.
So you said earlier that a lot of the people you're lending to don't necessarily have that credit footprint. So how does your credit scoring or your kind of assessment work? What sort of other things are you looking for outside of what would typically be in a credit score?
Yeah, so what we do is we use a lot of alternate data, which, a traditional formal financial institution will not consider that as data. For example, what I mentioned to you about the social capital, right? So we have actually decoded what the social capital is. For example, if they are into a livelihood activity, what kind of incubation support is provided to the individual? Do they have access to markets? Do they know where to get their inputs from? Is there a business plan in place? So all of this data is actually used for credit underwriting. So what does that mean? If all of this is there, then the risk is minimal, risk of lending to this person. And we only need to use this alternate data sources the first time we underwrite. So for the 65% who've applied to Rangde for the first time where there is no data, we use this underwriting model with alternate data. And once we create this credit score for them, the fact that Rangde is a regulated platform, every time somebody borrows from us, we are creating a credit score for them. So later on, 1 year down the line, when they've repaid their Rangde loan, there's actually a credit score for them. And then, this is recognized by other financial institutions. So their ability to then have a choice of lenders to choose from increases tremendously because now they're borrowed from a formal financial institution like Rangde. So that's how it works. So we decode a lot of demographic data, a lot of data on, interventions that are being done by the partner to kind of safeguard and ring fence this, investment from risk. And then we actually go about lending to the individual.
Right. Okay. And as you said, that then creates their credit profile or their footprint. That means they could go to a more traditional lending source, a bank or so, for further expansion. Could they also come back to Rangde for further monies if they wanted to, or do you only just do the once?
Oh, no. Many of them come back, but then, the very important success metric is not just, the number of people who borrow from us, but the important bit is to see, have we been able to restore agency for the communities we serve, right? And what do I mean by that? That they're not just overly dependent on Rangde, but they have the choice to decide where do they want to borrow from, right? Rangde's loan terms are affordable and community friendly. But tomorrow, if if a State Bank of India offers to them as better interest rates, we want them to have that agency and the decision-making ability to decide, hey, you know what, I want to borrow from SBI. So for us, that is also an, important success metric. So for people who are denied credit, Rangde is always the platform of choice. But we want to build their confidence and their credit profile to a way, to an extent that, they can borrow from anywhere else. Some people do come back, but we have also, heard very good instances where people who never got a loan from anywhere else are now being offered credit by, other banks in the community. So that choice, is extremely important because in India, every other day, people like me are spammed with calls from lenders saying that, oh, this is loan, why don't you borrow this? And somewhere we are not realizing it's a privilege because of all the data and the profiling that people have about me. I'm credit worthy, but the same is not available to rural folks, right? Just because that data is missing for them. So we want to make sure that, they have that choice and they are able to take charge of their own lives and decide what is best for them.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard of being spammed as a privilege, but now you put it in that sort of context, I absolutely get it. That, we are in a position where people feel that they can spam us, which is, this kind of sounds a bit ironic, but because of we're in this privileged position that people feel they can spam us, whereas someone who's not in this position, they wouldn't receive this sort of information.
You get annoyed, right? Like, why are you calling me? How do you get my number? We all get,
Yeah.
but there's so many people out there who have no choice of, where do they actually borrow from.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, what's the sort of typical loan value that you give, and how many people are you helping right now?
In our journey so far, I think in the last 16 years, we would have funded a little over 100,000 individuals. Um, and we have disbursed an average loan size would be about 50,000 Indian rupees per individual. But the ticket sizes also vary because the one thing that we do and we take great pride in this is the loans are very customized to the business activity or the venture for which people are borrowing. So the payback period, the frequency with which they repay, the interest rates are all based on the cash flows of this business. For example, if somebody is running a small supermarket or a grocery store in a village, their cash flows are almost on a daily basis. So for them, it's more frequent paybacks, like they probably pay back on a monthly basis. But for a farmer who has taken loans for inputs, to buy seeds and fertilizers, they're not going to realize the value of it until they've harvested, right? So for that, there's probably a 4 to 5 month repayment holiday, and they start to repay only after they've realized the value of, their crop. So this sort of customization also ensures that people are able to repay. So there's no one size fits all, both in terms of the loan amount as well as the payback period and the interest rates. It's very dependent on every individual's needs.
And you talked about the community having this agency to be able to go to other places. So that's part of I suppose, a ripple effect of what you're doing, right? How else is helping one person in a particular community or a small group? What sort of ripple effect is that having across the wider community that you're supporting?
Yeah, just like I mentioned, in the earlier bit subject, what we are now seeing is more and more people, having a voice, understanding that it's their choice on on what terms they want to borrow, and being able to think that okay, these terms are not friendly enough for me. These are not best for me, given my business situation, given my current situation. So people are now taking a step back and thinking about what is really best for them. For me, that is the beginning of change, right? Because they're not just passive recipients of credit. So in India, what has also happened is just taking a step back from this question and, sharing the context. What has happened is it's not just informal money lenders who are the problem. There's also this large microfinance institutions that started off with very, well-intentioned, they came with very good intentions of making credit accessible. But then what they also did is all the loans were actually cookie cuttered, and they almost operated like McDonald's, right? So everything was done in a way that increased the efficiency of the microfinance institutions. But what it did in return to the communities is it made them all passive recipients of credit, right? So people lost the ability to think, do I even need this loan or not? Right? So in some sense, what we're doing now is undoing what was done by, a lot of large microfinance institutions and empowering individuals to think what is really best for them. And that's the reason why, if you look at our growth numbers, they're probably tiny compared to any other large lending institution in India. But we're still okay with that because what we have done is humanize the entire process and ensure there's agency in everything that we actually do. So now seeing these conversations happen, people saying no to other lending institutions, saying that, oh, this is very expensive, I can't afford this. I don't need a loan now because this is actually for my child's education and I can only borrow in June. Why should I borrow now? People actually having these conversations, asking the right questions is really the beginning of change.
What's your plans in terms of expanding? You've helped about 100,000 people. I mean, the population of India is vast, right? And the number of people who could do with your help is vast. So what's your plans in terms of expanding this and making it much bigger and the reach much bigger?
Yeah, so I spoke to you about how we call our lenders social investors, right, Sanjay? So what we are trying to do is create a new category of investing, and we believe that what we do is very very unique, right? It's not investing in markets, it's not also charity. You're not just doing donations and forgetting about what you actually did. So what social investing does is kind of combines the best of both of these, right? You're creating impact, you're investing to actually create long term sustainable impact. And we want more and more Indians to actually join this movement and become social investors. And, everybody, expects us to have a vision that, oh, we'll impact 1 million lives. We know that will happen, but that will happen only if we have 1 million individuals who become social investors on the platform. So our vision is, see, how do we actually become a platform of significance where we have more and more people, at least 1 million individuals who have invested on the platform, because their journey of change making also begins once they actually invest in the platform. They understand what it means to be a rural Indian, how opportunities don't exist, and what it would take for people at the grassroots to actually progress. So our vision is to really see how do we create this new category and get, our first goal is to get 1 million social investors on the platform.
Okay. And just to go back, I suppose, to link a couple of things you said. So investors get to know more about the individuals that they're helping. Do they have like a means of having, I don't know, a regular update or communication with the person that they're helping?
Oh, yes, absolutely. A couple of things we do. One is, of course, updates that we share with them on what's been happening at that individual investee level. The other thing we also enable is conversations between, people who have invested and people who have received the loans. And we do this in three different ways. There are group calls that we host where, investees who have, received the loans and investors can actually get onto a Zoom call. We actually started this during the pandemic because we didn't have a choice, but we still wanted to enable this engagement. And that is something that has worked beautifully. We also organize field trips regularly because there's a very interesting insight we have seen. People tend to invest back in their home state. Sitting in Boston, but if I'm from the state of Maharashtra or Orissa, I would still invest back in my home state because I want to make sure that maybe someday when I go back home for my vacation, I can pay a visit to this individual. So at the back of, my mind when I'm investing, this is something that is, influencing my decision. So, and then we realize it's universal. Everybody really wants to give back closer to their home state. So we also know that, yeah, they wouldn't mind visiting them. So we actually do regular field visits where people can actually go visit the communities, meet people who they've invested in and see the progress they are making. In addition to progress, it's a very humbling experience for people who actually visit, our communities, because they realize that how wrong they were, when, you felt that, oh, with just a few thousand rupees, you can actually change somebody's life, right? Everybody thinks, and everybody wants to see those success stories. But the reality is very far from success stories. And it's only when you go pay a visit there and spend some time that you realize how hard it is for people, at a village level to actually make ends meet, to actually run their ventures and be successful at it. So they come back appreciating, why Rangde needs to exist. They also appreciate the circumstances in which our communities work and operate, and they become more, what do I say, more open to taking risks and more open to accepting failures. Because this is very important, right? Everybody talks about success stories, the impact of our work, but it's also important to create awareness about failures and build an appetite for these failures amongst people who actually invest.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I suppose that all investment comes with risk, right? And so there's no guarantee in any particular investment. Um, Talking of success, as you know, the title of this podcast series is Success Matters. So if you had a magic wand and you could wave it around, what would success mean to you?
Success, I think if I would have wanted definitely a lot more people on the platform as social investors.
Mhm.
I think because that's one thing I feel we could have done a lot better if we had focused more on creating awareness about our model and how it works.
Right.
As first-time entrepreneurs, we focused a lot on the communities we were working with, because that was a problem that we wanted to solve, right? So
Yes.
building partnerships on the ground, ensuring we know how do we identify the right recipients for the loan. We actually, spent insane amounts of efforts and resources in solving that. But we did realize that we also need to look at the other side of our platform, which is, the supply, which is getting enough social investors. So I think if I had a magic wand, I would actually go back to day one, do a few things differently to make sure that we also focus on the other side of our platform.
Oh yeah, I suppose it's a chicken and egg situation, right? Because you need to identify the communities that need the help before you can go to investors to say, can you help us? But then at the same time, if you have investors ready lined up, then you can go to communities and help them. So which do you do first?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're so right.
So one of the other things I do is I asked a previous guest to ask a question for my next guest. My previous guest asked me to ask you.
It's a question I've asked a lot of people, and hopefully your next guest appreciates being put on the spot. But my question is, are you happy?
Okay, how do you define your happiness?
I'm living my dream. I think
Okay,
so few people, have that opportunity to live their dream. And
yeah.
yeah, I think I'm deeply grateful every single day that I had this opportunity, to be living my life exactly the way I wanted it to be. So nothing gives me more happiness than that. And yes, I'm truly happy and blessed.
Was it a childhood dream to be able to help rural communities, or is it something that's developed, as you said, yeah, whilst you were living in London, in the UK, in Oxford, you kind of started to compare and contrast the differences? Was that the point? Was there a particular point where this dream of yours was, a dream that you wanted to act upon?
Not a childhood dream, but something that I've been nurturing since my adolescence. I think because there were a few experiences during my undergrads that kind of made me realize that I didn't want to be in the corporate race in some sense. So that's when I switched tracks and I went on to do my master's in social work, and so I think moving to the UK, Sanjay, only accelerated the process. But for both me and Ram, even before we went to the UK, we were very clear that we want to stay there for a bit, come back and do something in the social space. So that's how, it was. It was in this sort of an environment that both Ram and I also met. We met at a volunteering event, hosted by our organizations. We realized that we had a very similar dream and this is what we wanted to do. And eventually we got married. So it was a very conscious decision. And yeah, both of us had this shared dream and goal that we wanted to do something for the larger good and, something that's beyond us and something beyond just taking care of ourselves.
Right. No, that's brilliant. So many people have these sorts of thoughts, but don't actually act upon them. Whereas both collectively came together to create something that will make a difference to so many lives, which is it's excellent. It's brilliant what you're doing here. Do you have a question for my next guest?
Yes. What is your success mantra?
What is your success mantra? Okay. That's interesting. Do you have one?
Yes, I think my success mantra is to be grateful. And
Okay.
I have three things actually, which I'm consciously working on: to be kind, to be grateful, and not procrastinate. So these are
And I'll procrastinate. Okay. So kindness, gratefulness, and no procrastination.
yes.
Do you focus on those then every day? Is that part of when your kind of morning routine is to say, right, these are the three things that I want to get every day?
Absolutely. And there are days when I don't do any of these, but then when I end the day, I look back and say, hey, you know what? I promised this, but I didn't do any of these. So the next day is, much better than today because I'm more conscious of it.
Right, right. Okay, understood. So if people wanted to get in contact with you, if they wanted to help, how best could they get in touch, learn a bit more about what you do, and also invest in your platform?
Sure. So the platform is rangde.in. Currently, because of the regulations, only people um, who have an Indian bank account can actually lend through the platform, because we can actually, repatriate the money from India because of, foreign currency regulations, FEMA acts, and all of those things. So because of which, people can, only if people are, usually people from Indian origin or non-resident Indians still continue to have Indian bank accounts. So that's the only thing. And I'd just like to say that to save people the trouble of going to the platform, trying to invest. And if they don't have it, it could be a disappointment. But then for people who are not of Indian origin or do not have an Indian bank account, they can actually become an equity investor in Runway. We are entirely funded by individuals as an organization, just like we have individual social investors. Even in the company, we only have individual equity investors. So, yeah, so that's a way people can actually invest and be a part of our journey. You can just reach out to me on my email ID, which is smita@rangde.in, and be happy to take the process further and explain to people how it works.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. So if you're in India or you have Indian origin and therefore have the appropriate kind of paperwork with an Indian bank account, you can invest directly in Rangde. And if you're not an Indian citizen or don't have Indian bank accounts, then you can become an equity investor and contact you in regards to creating that equity investment.
Absolutely. And follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. We're very active on both mediums.
Yes, that's actually where I found you, was on LinkedIn. And that's where the story, I suppose, began, that I started following you and thought, okay, yeah, that looks really interesting. I would love to have you share your story. So it's been a very fascinating conversation, Smita. Thank you very much for that. I think we're at the top of our time now. So we'll be sure to share in the videos itself, the links to your website, your LinkedIn, your Twitter profiles. But yes, thank you very much for taking part in Success Matters today.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. If you'd like to find out more about how you can find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.